Duchess of Whitcombe will surrender her household keys before midnight, Duke Adrian announced, while nearly 300 guests watched his wife stand alone beneath the chandeliers. His second sentence was colder. Until the accusations against her have been examined, Lady Octavia Crowell will assume the Duchess's place upon the Winter Council. No one gasped. Such courtesies belonged only to private disasters. Elara Whitcombe felt the silver key ring at her waist grow suddenly heavy. 4 years of marriage, 12 tenant farms rescued from flooding, and every drainage channel she had designed for the estate had been erased in 2 measured sentences. Across the ballroom, Lady Octavia stood beside Adrian in a copper-red gown, her black hair arranged beneath a diamond comb. She did not smile. Her expression was far more skillful than triumph, solemn concern softened by apparent reluctance. Elara looked only at her husband. Adrian wore the dark blue tailcoat she had chosen for him in London. Candlelight sharpened the scar along his jaw and turned his eyes almost black. He looked every inch the unshakable Duke of Whitcombe. Only the tightness of his right hand revealed that the announcement cost him anything. "On what authority?" Elara asked. A murmur stirred and died. Adrian's gaze hardened. "Mine. That establishes your power, Your Grace. It does not establish my guilt." Something flickered across his face. Months earlier, he might have admired her composure. Tonight he appeared to regard it as another weapon. Elias Rook, the estate manager, stepped forward carrying a leather portfolio. From it, he removed a rain-stained map and laid it upon the Winter Council's long table. "The Northern Flood Survey," Rook said. Bearing her Grace's initials, Elara recognized the valleys, boundary roads, and blue lines marking the streams. She also recognized the conclusion written beneath them, that the northern watercourse could safely be diverted through the tenant meadows without threatening the villages downstream. She had never written that conclusion. Rook produced 3 payment orders allegedly authorizing the purchase of stone, timber, and iron fittings for a canal that did not exist. Together, they represented more than £9,000, enough to make even Whitcombe vulnerable to its creditors. "Those are not my measurements," Elara said. "They were found in your locked workroom," Adrian replied. "And who discovered them?" "Mr. Rook." "Who possessed a second key to that room?" Adrian's silence answered before Rook did. "The estate manager must have access during an emergency," Rook said. "There was no emergency when you entered it." "There is one now," Octavia said gently. "The estate cannot endure scandal and financial uncertainty together." Elara turned toward her. "Then it is fortunate Whitcombe has acquired your assistance so quickly." Octavia lowered her eyes, performing wounded dignity for the room. Adrian descended the shallow dais. "Enough." "No." Elara's voice remained controlled. "You summoned half the county to hear an accusation. They may also hear my answer." His jaw tightened. This gathering was arranged before the evidence was discovered. Yet Lady Octavia came prepared to replace me. For the first time, several guests looked openly at Octavia. Adrian stopped an arm's length from his wife. Beneath his anger lay something Elara understood too well: fear. Not fear that she had stolen from him, but fear that the political men surrounding him might believe a surveyor's daughter had governed Whitcombe, while its duke merely wore the title. "You were warned," he said quietly. "I asked you to surrender the estate plans voluntarily. You asked me to sign them over to Mr. Rook without examination, and you refused, because the spring flood calculations were incomplete. You refuse every limit placed upon you." The words struck more deeply than the accusation. Once, her intelligence had been the reason he sought her counsel. Now he spoke of it as disobedience. Elara touched the keyring. "Have the original field books brought here. Compare the paper, ink, and measurements before you transfer authority." Adrian glanced toward Lord Keswick, Octavia's uncle and the parliamentary patron whose support he had pursued for nearly a year. Keswick's expression remained politely expectant. There it was, the moment in which Adrian might delay, investigate, or choose his wife over the approval of men who had never accepted her. He chose. The decision has been made. Elara unfastened the keys and placed them in his palm. The contact lasted less than a second. As you command, Your Grace. Rook began returning the papers to the portfolio. One corner of the stained map caught against its brass clasp, turning the sheet toward the light. Elara saw the puncture beside her forged initials. It was small and crescent-shaped, the mark left by a surveyor's compass when its shorter leg slipped under pressure. She knew that defect. Her father's old brass compass had produced it on hundreds of maps before his death. But that instrument had been locked inside a cedar cabinet in Elara's private workroom for nearly 2 years. Only 3 people knew where she kept the key. She looked from the puncture to Elias Rook. A trace of pale clay marked the edge of his left boot, clay found only near Whitcombe's abandoned northern boundary station. Then Octavia reached for the Duchess's keys. Elara understood at last. They were not merely removing her from the council or accusing her of theft. Someone needed unrestricted access to her maps, her instruments, and the northern land before the true winter survey could be completed. The humiliation was not the purpose. It was the door. And Adrian had just placed the key in Octavia's hand. Octavia closed her fingers around the keys, but Elara did not release them at once. The 2 women stood linked by the silver ring while the ballroom watched, Octavia's expression composed and Elara's attention fixed upon the smallest key in the set, the narrow iron key to her cedar instrument cabinet. The household keys grant authority over provisions, servants, and domestic accounts, Elara said. They do not grant permission to open my father's cabinet. Its contents belong to the trust established in my marriage settlement. Octavia's fingers tightened. Surely you have nothing to conceal. Then you will have no difficulty honoring the law. Elara released the ring before Adrian could order her to do so. She left the ballroom without waiting for dismissal, aware that every measured step would be interpreted either as guilt or defiance by people who had already chosen the more entertaining explanation. Mrs. Agnes Sayer, Whitcombe's silver-haired housekeeper, followed her into the western corridor. She had served the family since Adrian was a boy and had never treated Elara's practical habits as unbecoming. "Your Grace," she whispered, "shall I send for your carriage?" No, not yet. Elara could not simply flee Whitcombe Hall. Her marriage settlement provided a modest separate allowance, but the surveying patents inherited from her father remained in a trust administered jointly by Adrian and a London solicitor. Worse, 12 tenant families had accepted winter planting agreements based upon drainage guarantees bearing Elara's name. If she departed before proving the maps false, Rook could blame every failure upon her calculations, and those families would lose both their crops and their leases. "I need to reach my workroom before Lady Octavia does," Elara said. Mrs. Sayer did not ask why. She merely lifted her skirts and led Elara through the old servants' passage behind the portrait gallery. They reached the eastern workroom less than 2 minutes before footsteps sounded on the main staircase. Elara entered and stopped. The room appeared orderly, field books aligned upon the shelves, measuring rods secured to the wall, rolled maps tied with green ribbon, yet the air carried the faint mineral scent of wet clay. She crossed to the cedar cabinet. Its brass lock showed no scratches, but when she pressed her thumb beneath the lower hinge, it came away marked with beeswax. Someone had taken an impression of the key rather than forcing the lock. "Was this room cleaned today?" she asked. "Not by my staff," Mrs. Sayer replied. Elara opened the cabinet using a smaller key hidden inside the lining of her reticule. Her father's compass lay in its velvet recess, polished and apparently untouched. She lifted it toward the lamp, Pale grit clung inside the hinge, and the pointed leg smelled faintly of iron-rich clay from the northern boundary. The instrument had been removed, used, cleaned, and returned. Elara's father had taught her to read ground before he taught her to read poetry. At 13, she could calculate a slope using a level and chain. At 17, she had corrected a contractor's measurements and prevented a retaining wall from collapsing above a workers' camp. After marrying Adrian, she had redesigned Whitcombe's neglected drainage network, reducing flooded acreage by nearly half in 3 years. Adrian had once stood beside her in a rain-soaked field and declared that the estate had gained more from her mind than from any dowry. But when London politicians mocked him for allowing a tradesman's daughter to manage ducal land, his pride had slowly transformed gratitude into resentment. Elara examined the field books. 2 volumes were missing, the original Northern Survey and her father's notebook describing the abandoned boundary station. The approaching footsteps grew louder. "Mrs. Sayer, did Mr. Rook request wagons from the household yard during the last fortnight?" "6, Your Grace. He said they were carrying coal to the northern cottages." "Were they?" The housekeeper hesitated. "The drivers were paid from the estate office, not through me. None returned by the kitchen road." Before Elara could ask more, the door opened. Octavia entered with Rook and 2 footmen behind her. Adrian was not with them. "By the Duke's authority," Octavia said, "this room is to be sealed." Elara placed the compass inside her reticule. Rook noticed the movement. "That instrument may constitute evidence." "It is property, protected by my father's trust. Everything associated with the fraudulent survey must remain at Whitcombe. Then obtain a magistrate's order identifying each object you intend to seize." Octavia's voice cooled. "Must you make every accommodation difficult?" Elara looked directly at her. "You have my keys, my council chair, and my husband's confidence. You will not also have my consent." She took 1 blank field book, 3 pencils, and a folding measuring rule from the desk. Rook stepped into her path, but Mrs. Sayer moved to Elara's side with such quiet certainty that the footmen lowered their eyes. Octavia ordered them to let the Duchess pass. In the corridor, Elara opened the blank book and wrote down the missing volumes, the wax beneath the hinge, the clay upon the compass, and the 6 unexplained wagons. Mrs. Sayer watched her. "Where will you go?" "To the lower tenant cottages. If the official maps are correct, the winter channels should be carrying water east." They reached a narrow window overlooking the dark grounds. Below, moonlight caught the surface of the main drainage channel. The water was moving west, toward the northern boundary and the abandoned reservoir. Elara's skin went cold. The payment orders accused her of purchasing canal stone and iron fittings in September, but the diversion channel visible below had been altered recently. Its freshly cut banks had not yet grown moss, and November rain still darkened the exposed soil. More importantly, her supposed authorization bore measurements recorded on October 12th. Elara remembered that date precisely because the northern river had remained frozen from dawn until the following morning. No surveyor could have taken water depth readings through 9 inches of unbroken ice. The forged payments were not merely inconsistent with her books. They described measurements that had been physically impossible to obtain, and whoever created them had assumed no one would remember the river had frozen 6 weeks before winter officially began. The river had been frozen on October 12th, and Elara could prove it. She had recorded the temperature and ice depth that morning because a blocked culvert near Mill Lane had required emergency work. Mrs. Sayer had also authorized hot meals for the laborers who spent 6 hours breaking the ice. Those kitchen accounts belonged to the household rather than the estate office, which meant Rook could not have removed them from Elara's workroom. "Find the provision book for October," Elara told the housekeeper. "Do not bring it to me. Lock it in your room and tell no one where it is." Mrs. Sayer nodded and disappeared toward the service stairs, while Elara returned to her chambers for a wool cloak and sturdy boots. She had barely fastened the cloak when bells rang below, summoning the senior servants to the great hall. From the upper gallery, she watched Octavia use the Duchess's keys for the first time. The servants stood in 2 lines as Octavia announced that all correspondence, supply orders, and household accounts must now pass through her hands. Rook would supervise the storerooms, stables, and maintenance crews. Any servant assisting Elara without written authorization would be dismissed without a character reference. Adrian stood beside Octavia, silent but visibly uncomfortable, when several older servants glanced toward the gallery. He had stripped Elara of authority. Now he was watching another woman reshape his household with it. When Octavia ordered 2 footmen to move Elara's papers from the Duchess's morning room, Adrian finally spoke. "Her private belongings are not to be disturbed." Octavia turned toward him with perfect gentleness. "Of course, I meant only the estate documents." The distinction appeared to satisfy him, though Elara knew it was meaningless when Octavia alone decided which papers belonged to the estate. Adrian looked up and saw his wife watching. For one suspended moment, shame disturbed the certainty in his face. Then Rook handed him a memorandum, and he looked away. Elara left through the servants' court before anyone could prevent her. A stable lad named Nathan quietly provided a plain mare, but warned that Rook had forbidden the grooms to saddle the Duchess's horses. Elara rode north beneath a moon veiled by thin cloud, following the altered channel toward the lower cottages. Water whispered where no current should have existed. Fresh spade marks cut across the banks, and willow stakes had been driven into the ground at regular intervals. Near the first tenant farm, she found Thomas Hale crouched beside a wooden sluice, with a lantern hidden beneath his coat. The 18-year-old apprentice had worked under Elara's father, and still carried his old measuring chain in a canvas satchel. He rose so quickly that his boot slipped in the mud. "Your Grace, I was coming to the hall." "Why?" "Someone changed the fall of the channel. I thought it was settling at first, but the gradient is too exact." Together, they measured the water's descent across 3 intervals. Elara held the leveling rule, while Thomas stretched the chain between the willow stakes. The channel had been deliberately cut to draw water northwest, not merely toward the abandoned reservoir, but through a narrow piece of tenant land adjoining Lord Keswick's proposed canal route. "They are saturating the ground," Thomas said, "so it will be judged unsuitable for farming," Elara replied. Once declared unproductive, the land could be purchased cheaply or reclaimed under the canal agreement Octavia's uncle had brought to Adrian. The forged payments made Elara appear to have designed the diversion herself. A sudden crack sounded upstream. Water surged against the sluice, spilling over the bank toward the Marsh family's cottage. Elara ran into the channel without removing her cloak. She wedged the measuring rule beneath the warped lower gate and ordered Thomas to release the eastern catch. The iron mechanism would not move. Examining the hinge by lantern light, she saw it had been fitted backward, forcing pressure against the locking pin. "Bring me the chain." Thomas passed it to her. She looped it through the gate brace, used the willow post as a lever, and shifted the gate far enough for water to escape into the old drainage trench. Within minutes, the level around the cottage began to fall. Mr. Marsh emerged carrying his youngest daughter, followed by his wife and 2 frightened boys. Their gratitude embarrassed Elara less than their fear angered her. Someone had endangered sleeping children to make a field appear naturally flooded. As Thomas gathered the chain, one brass link remained caught in the reversed hinge. It was not part of his equipment. The small oval piece bore the stamped mark KCW, Keswick Canal Works, and a batch number, 17. Elara wrapped it in her handkerchief without cleaning away the black grease. A manufactured fitting could be traced to its foundry, purchaser, and delivery order if its identifying mark remained intact. Hoofbeats approached before she could inspect it further. Adrian arrived with Rook and 4 mounted servants. He looked first at Elara standing ankle-deep in the channel, then at the receding water around the cottage. You were forbidden from interfering with estate works, he said. Those works nearly drowned 5 people. Rook dismounted and examined the sluice. The gate was installed according to Her Grace's original specifications. My specifications placed the hinge on the eastern side. Elara showed Adrian the reversed mechanism. His gaze moved from the hinge to the direction of the current. He had accompanied her during the original improvements and knew enough to recognize the contradiction. Why would anyone reverse it? He asked. Rook answered before Elara could. A laborer's mistake, Your Grace. It also appears the Duchess opened the secondary channel without authorization, creating the very surge she claims to have prevented. Adrian's expression hardened, not with certainty, but with the effort required to preserve it. You should have reported the danger. To the man responsible for it, Elara asked. Rook went still. Thomas stepped forward, but Elara caught his sleeve and stopped him from revealing what they had found. Adrian ordered the Marsh family moved to higher ground, and the sluice guarded until daylight. A sensible command, though it came only after Elara had already prevented the disaster. As the riders returned to Whitcombe Hall, Octavia watched from an upstairs window. Rook entered her room several minutes later and told her what had happened. When he mentioned Thomas Hale, she ceased turning the silver household keys between her fingers. The apprentice should have left Yorkshire when his master died, she said. And the Duchess? Rook asked. Octavia looked toward the northern channel, where Elara's lantern still moved through the darkness. I mistook her humiliation for defeat. Make certain I do not make that mistake twice. Before dawn, Octavia sent 2 men to search Thomas Hale's lodgings. They found his bed empty, his surveying satchel gone, and a folded order on the table, dismissing him from all employment connected to Whitcombe. By then, Thomas was hiding in the loft above the Marsh family's stable, where Elara had instructed him to remain until she could secure his safety. She returned to the hall as the first grey light touched the eastern windows and found Adrian, Octavia, and Rook gathered in the estate library. Mud had dried along the hem of her green gown, and one sleeve remained dark from the water at the sluice. On the table lay a notice prepared for distribution among the tenants. It declared that Lady Octavia's prompt intervention had prevented serious flooding, and that the disturbance had resulted from unauthorized alterations made under Elara's former management. You have put your name to my work, Elara said. Octavia glanced at the notice. I have put the Duke's authority behind an explanation that will prevent panic. A lie rarely prevents panic. It merely delays it until the truth becomes more expensive. Adrian stood near the fire with both hands clasped behind his back. He looked as though he had not slept. 5 cottages are safe, he said. That is what matters. They are safe because Thomas Hale and I reopened the eastern trench, after entering restricted works against my command. Elara heard the argument he had constructed for himself. If her actions were disobedient, he did not have to admit they had been necessary. Before she could answer, a groom burst into the library without knocking. Water was rising behind the abandoned northern reservoir. Cracks had appeared along the lower retaining bank, and the lockkeeper believed it might fail before noon. Rook insisted the reservoir had been empty for years. Elara unfolded a current estate map and placed her finger upon the altered channel. It was empty until someone diverted 3 streams into it. If the lower bank breaks, the water will cross Bell Farm and strike the village road. Octavia ordered Rook to take laborers north and reinforce the bank with timber. Timber will increase the load, Elara said. The bank is clay over loose shale. Drive posts into it now, and the entire face may shear away. Octavia's mouth tightened. You no longer direct the estate. The water is indifferent to who directs it. Adrian looked between them. What would you do? It was the first time since the accusation that he had asked rather than ordered. Elara pointed to an old spillway, marked faintly on the western side of the reservoir. Clear this channel, and open the stone gate by no more than 18 inches. It will release pressure into the unplanted common, without sending a surge toward the cottages. Rook shook his head. That gate has not moved in 15 years. It moved 6 months ago when I inspected it. Adrian's eyes sharpened. He had not known of that inspection because Elara had arranged it through the maintenance allowance, after Rook repeatedly declared the reservoir irrelevant. "Take 50 men," he told Rook. "Follow her instructions." Octavia intervened softly. "If the Duchess has miscalculated again, the consequences will be yours." Adrian's hesitation lasted only a heartbeat, but Elara saw it. "Then she will accompany us," he said. They rode north through freezing rain. At the reservoir, water pressed against the retaining bank in a dark, trembling sheet. A crack ran 20 feet across its face, widening each time the wind drove another wave against it. Rook's workers had already brought sharpened timber posts, but Elara ordered them set aside. She divided the men into 3 groups, one to clear the western spillway, one to dig a shallow relief trench, and one to remove stones jammed around the old gate. Rook contradicted every instruction until Adrian commanded him to be silent. The gate mechanism was rusted but intact. Elara calculated the pressure from the waterline, the width of the outlet, and the fall toward the common. When the laborers turned the winch, the gate rose too quickly. The chain slipped through one man's gloves, and the wheel began spinning. Elara seized the brake lever, while Adrian caught the worker before he fell into the outlet. Together they held the mechanism until the chain could be secured. Water roared through the spillway, but the level behind the bank fell inch by inch. By mid-morning, the crack had stopped widening. The village was safe. Lady Octavia arrived in a closed carriage after the danger had passed. She distributed blankets and hot broth, spoke to the tenants by name from a list Mrs. Sayer had once prepared for Elara, and allowed Lord Keswick's secretary to record that the Winter Council had successfully managed its first emergency. When Elara objected, Octavia replied loudly enough for the assembled tenants to hear. "No one denies that you possess useful practical knowledge. The concern is what you have chosen to do with it." The implications spread at once. Elara had first created the danger and then staged its solution. Rook reinforced it by producing a work order bearing her copied initials and instructions to reopen the northern feeder streams. Adrian read the paper beside the reservoir she had just saved. His face closed again. Thomas emerged from behind the stable before Elara could stop him. "That order is false," he said. Rook seized him by the collar and accused him of stealing estate instruments. A constable accompanying Lord Keswick's secretary stepped forward. Thomas looked young then, not the capable apprentice who had measured the channel beside Elara, but an 18-year-old boy facing transportation or imprisonment if powerful men agreed upon his guilt. "He acted under my instruction," Elara said. Thomas stared at her. "Your Grace, I did not. Everything he removed, measured, or examined was done at my direction. If there is to be a charge, place it against me." By claiming responsibility, she protected Thomas, but she also gave Octavia precisely what she needed, a formal admission that Elara had continued interfering after Adrian withdrew her authority. Adrian ordered the constable to release the apprentice, but instructed Thomas to remain at Bell Farm pending inquiry. Old Josiah Bell, the reservoir's lockkeeper, stepped from the crowd and promised to house him. As Elara passed, Bell whispered that he had seen covered Keswick wagons at the reservoir 3 nights earlier, but his daughter's tenancy depended upon Rook, and he dared not speak publicly without protection. Elara gave him her word that she would not expose him until she could secure both daughter and lease. That evening, she entered Adrian's study carrying 3 objects: the household provision book documenting the frozen river on October 12th, the forged survey bearing impossible water depth measurements from that date, and the greased brass link stamped KCW17. She laid them in a straight line across his desk. "Do not believe me," she said. "Send the link to its foundry. Ask who purchased batch 17. Summon the laborers named in these payment orders and require them to describe how they measured a river beneath 9 inches of ice. Then ask Mr. Rook why Keswick wagons were unloading materials at a reservoir he claims has been abandoned for 15 years. Adrian stared at the 3 objects. For the first time, doubt entered his face, without immediately being buried beneath anger. Elara placed the old compass beside them. You asked for evidence. Here it is. What happens next will not be Octavia's choice, Rook's choice, or mine. She held her husband's gaze. It will be yours. Adrian stared at the evidence for so long that the fire behind him settled into a red glow. He lifted the provision book first, read Mrs. Sayers' entry recording 9 inches of ice on October 12th, and placed it beside the forged survey. The contradiction was unmistakable. Who else knew the river had frozen? He asked. Every laborer who worked at Mill Lane, every servant who prepared their meals, and anyone living within 5 miles of the northern bridge. Elara replied. Then the date may be a copying error. A copying error does not explain my compass being removed from a locked cabinet or a Keswick fitting being lodged inside a gate installed backward. Adrian picked up the brass link. Black grease stained his thumb. For one moment, Elara believed he would summon a neutral magistrate and place Rook under guard. Then the study door opened, and Lord Keswick entered with Octavia and 2 men Elara recognized as members of the County Canal Commission. Keswick carried a packet bearing a parliamentary seal. He informed Adrian that the commissioners would inspect Whitcombe's northern land within 48 hours. Unless Adrian could guarantee uncontested access and stable management, the government-backed canal investment would pass to a rival route through Northumberland. The project promised to restore Whitcombe's credit, increase rents, and give Adrian the political influence his father had squandered. It was precisely the future Adrian had pursued since their first year of marriage. Octavia examined the objects on the desk without touching them. Elara has always been skilled at presenting fragments as certainty, she said, but a household entry proves only that ice was observed near Mill Lane. It does not establish conditions at every point of the river. The Northern Bridge and Mill Lane are fed by the same watercourse, Elara replied. If anything, the ice would have been thicker upstream. One commissioner shifted uncomfortably. The other avoided her gaze. Keswick produced signed statements from 3 laborers claiming they had taken measurements under Elara's personal instruction on October 12th. Elara recognized the names. Their cottages stood on land managed by Rook, and their leases were due for renewal before Christmas. Question them separately, she told Adrian. Ask each man where he placed the measuring rod and what color cord marked the depth. A truthful surveyor will remember his station. Men repeating an invented account will repeat only the words they were given. Adrian looked toward the commissioners. Would that satisfy the inquiry? Keswick answered for them. There will be no inquiry unless you request one, and requesting one will postpone the inspection. The Treasury will not hold the route while a duke resolves a domestic quarrel. Elara saw the trap close. Adrian was not being asked whether she was innocent. He was being asked whether proving her innocence was worth losing the canal agreement. Octavia placed a document before him. It appointed Rook temporary director of all northern works and granted Keswick Canal Works authority to remove obsolete barriers, gates, channels, and structures that interfered with the Commission's inspection. Another paper was a sworn complaint accusing Elara of fraudulent expenditure, theft of estate instruments, and deliberate interference with waterworks. If Adrian signed it, a magistrate could seize her papers, restrict her movements, and prevent her from speaking to tenants named as witnesses. Give me 3 days, Elara said. You have 48 hours, Keswick replied. I do not require 48. I require 3, because truth must be established in a form no interested commissioner can dismiss. She turned to Adrian. Send the brass link to the foundry, under seal. Place Rook's accounts in the custody of your solicitor. Protect the laborers' leases before questioning them. If I am wrong, I will surrender every estate paper I possess and withdraw from Whitcombe without protest. Adrian's face changed at the last words. Withdraw where? That is no longer the question before you. You speak as though this marriage is already concluded. You concluded it beneath the chandeliers. Octavia looked down, concealing the satisfaction in her eyes. Adrian moved toward the window. Beyond the glass, workmen carried lanterns across the courtyard under Rook's direction. Elara could almost feel the distance between the man standing before her and the husband who had once held an umbrella above her maps for 3 hours in the rain. He had not become ignorant. He had become unwilling to pay the price of knowing. A footman entered with Mrs. Sayer and the 3 laborers whose names appeared on Keswick's statements. Rook had summoned them before Elara arrived. Adrian questioned the first man about the October survey. The laborer's hands shook as he repeated that Elara had ordered him to break the ice and measure the water beneath it. When Adrian asked where, he glanced toward Rook before naming the northern bridge. The second man gave the same answer in nearly identical words. The third began to say that he had never seen Elara that day, but Rook quietly mentioned the man's widowed mother and her cottage lease. The laborer lowered his head and confirmed the statement. Adrian had seen the threat. Elara knew he had seen it, because his gaze went to Rook and remained there. Now, she said softly, you know why their testimony agrees. Keswick reminded him that the commissioner's carriage would depart at sunrise if authority remained disputed. Adrian returned to the desk. He could have dismissed the room, protected the witnesses, and ordered an inquiry. Instead, he took up his pen. Whitcombe cannot be held hostage to accusations from either side, he said. The canal inspection will proceed. He signed the appointment granting Rook control of the northern works. Then he signed the complaint against his wife. With those 2 strokes, he gave the men who had altered the channels legal access to every gate, map, and boundary marker Elara had tried to protect. The magistrate allowed her to remain in the western guest apartments because of her rank, but she was forbidden to enter the estate office, communicate with named tenants, or travel beyond Whitcombe's southern boundary pending examination. Her workroom was placed under seal. Thomas and Josiah Bell were listed as potential accomplices. Mrs. Sayer began to protest, but Elara stopped her. Octavia was already preparing dismissals, and Elara needed one trustworthy person inside the house. When Adrian offered to ensure that she was treated with dignity, Elara removed her wedding ring and placed it beside the inkstand. You mistake comfortable confinement for dignity, she said. I asked you to examine the truth. You chose the canal. She left him standing before the documents that made his choice official. By midnight, her goal had changed. She would no longer spend her strength convincing Adrian to trust her. She would protect Thomas, the Bells, the Marsh family, and every tenant whose home lay below the northern reservoir, with or without her husband's authority. In the western apartments, Mrs. Sayer helped her remove her mud-stained gown. Sewn inside its hem, where Rook's search had not found it, was the handkerchief Elara had used to wrap the brass link. When she unfolded it, however, she discovered only a plain replacement. The stamped KCW link Adrian had left upon his desk was already gone. A pebble struck the window. Below stood Nathan, the stable lad, holding a folded message Thomas had sent from Bell Farm. Elara lowered a ribbon and drew it up. The note contained only 2 sentences. Rook's men had collected 6 barrels of blasting powder from the quarry. At first light, they were taking them to the western spillway, the one structure preventing the full reservoir from emptying directly toward the village. Elara read Thomas's warning twice, then held the paper over the candle until the flame consumed every word. Wake the kitchen staff, she told Mrs. Sayer. Send them through the lower village in pairs. They are to tell every family below the northern road to take blankets, food, and children to St. Anne's Chapel. Mrs. Sayer glanced toward the constable stationed outside the western apartments. He will stop us. Then tell him the Duchess is planning an escape through the garden door. Understanding flashed across the housekeeper's face. She loudly ordered a maid to fetch Elara's traveling cloak, then began arguing with the constable when he entered. While their voices filled the corridor, Elara descended the narrow linen stair concealed behind the dressing room panel. Nathan waited in the stable yard with the plain mare already saddled. She instructed him to ride for the chapel and ring the flood bell until the village was awake. "Do not go near the reservoir," she warned. "Find Thomas and remain with him." Elara had crossed only half the northern meadow when the first explosion split the darkness. The ground struck upward beneath the mare's hooves. A red flash rose beyond the ridge, followed by a roar so deep it seemed to come from beneath the earth. The western spillway had not merely been opened, it had been shattered. Water burst through the stonework and swept down the old common in a broad black wall. The chapel bell began ringing before the echo faded. Elara reached the village road as families poured from their cottages. Some carried lanterns, others had fled barefoot into the freezing mud. She directed them uphill towards St. Anne's, ordering the strongest men to carry children and the elderly rather than attempt to save furniture or livestock. A second explosion tore open the retaining bank near Bell Farm. The blast threw stone and timber across the road and cut off the shortest route to the chapel. Elara climbed onto a mounting block and studied the approaching water by lantern light. Its leading edge curved eastward at the elm grove, following a depression no current map recorded. She remembered the line from her father's missing notebook. Before the reservoir was constructed, an old quarry drainage cut had crossed beneath the Whitcombe timber yard and emerged beside the southern pasture. If the buried cut remained open, the flood would travel beneath the yard, undermine its foundations, and strike the village from behind. "Not the chapel road," she called. "Take everyone across Harker Hill to the old lime kiln." Josiah Bell appeared through the rain supporting his injured daughter. "The kiln has no roof. It stands above the quarry cut. The chapel does not." Several tenants hesitated because the Duke's printed flood instructions named St. Anne's as their emergency shelter. Elara looked at them steadily. Those instructions were written before the channels were altered. Choose the hill. The Marsh family turned first. Others followed. Elara remained at the crossroads counting each household until Adrian arrived with mounted servants and the canal commissioner's carriage behind him. He demanded to know why she had violated the magistrate's restriction. "Because your director used the authority you gave him to carry blasting powder into a full reservoir." Adrian ordered his men to arrest Rook and close the remaining gates. The foreman at his side produced the signed authorization bearing Adrian's own seal. Under its terms, Rook had dismissed the old gate crews, replaced every lock, and taken the operating keys. No one knew where he had gone. Adrian could revoke the authority, but an order issued in the rain could not restore demolished stone, locate hidden keys, or teach unfamiliar men how to control a water system whose original maps had been seized from Elara's room. The Duke looked toward the reservoir, and for the first time she saw him understand the shape of his mistake, rather than merely doubt the accusation against her. His decision had not failed to prevent the disaster. It had made the disaster possible. A rumbling sound rolled beneath the timber yard. Elara shouted for everyone to move uphill. The earth collapsed moments later. 3 storage buildings, 2 saw sheds, and nearly a year's supply of seasoned oak dropped into the hidden quarry, cut as water exploded through the ground. The commissioners watched Whitcomb's principal source of winter income disappear into a churning trench. One carriage horse panicked, overturning the vehicle and scattering the sealed canal papers into the flood. Lord Keswick's promised inspection ended before it began. Adrian ordered men toward the sheds, but the tenants did not move until Elara repeated the command and assigned them safe positions along the higher bank. That hesitation cost him more than timber or political influence. The people of Whitcombe no longer trusted his judgment with their lives. At the lime kiln, Elara organized the injured by urgency. Mrs. Marsh tore linen into bandages, while Josiah Bell identified the missing families. Thomas had not arrived. Nathan stumbled in near dawn with blood along one temple and reported that Rook's men had seized Thomas outside Bell Farm. Nathan had followed their wagon until it turned toward the abandoned boundary station. Before he was discovered and struck, he had seen iron plates loaded beneath a canvas cover and Rook carrying Elara's missing Northern Field book. Adrian heard him. Why would Rook take the boy there? Because Thomas can identify the false measurements and the Keswick equipment, Elara said. And because the boundary station contains the original control gate for the entire northern watercourse. She drew the system from memory upon the kiln's dusty stone floor. The destroyed spillway had released only the western section of the reservoir. The altered channels were still feeding water into the upper basin. If Rook removed the iron control plates at the boundary station, the remaining water would cut through the saturated tenant land, erase the old boundary markers, and leave the Canal Commission with no physical evidence that the route had ever crossed protected farms. Adrian ordered horses prepared. Elara did not move. If you ride there with armed men, Rook will open the gate or kill Thomas before you reach the door. Then tell me what to do. It was the first command he had surrendered to her, without qualification, but it came too late to restore what he had broken. Elara estimated the rate of inflow from the surviving channels and marked a line across the drawing. The upper basin will reach the weakened eastern bank shortly after 9. We have perhaps 3 hours. I will prevent the breach because families still live below it, not because you ask me to preserve Whitcombe. She looked at the ruined timber yard, the displaced tenants, and the soaked canal documents caught among broken branches. When this is over, you will answer for the authority you gave Rook. I will not help you hide behind him. Adrian accepted the words without protest. Then Josiah Bell examined the drawing and pointed to a narrow maintenance tunnel beneath the boundary station. Its entrance could be reached from an old quarry shaft, but the shaft lay beyond the northern property line. The boundary Elara was legally forbidden to cross. At that moment, a constable arrived from the hall carrying a new magistrate's warrant. Lady Octavia had reported Elara's escape, accused her of causing the explosions, and demanded her immediate arrest. Behind the constable, the cracked earth trembled as the upper basin continued to rise. Elara had 3 hours to reach Thomas and close the control gate. The law intended to give her none. The constable unfolded the warrant while the upper basin groaned behind him. His name was Matthew Finch, a former cavalry sergeant whose face suggested that neither rank nor panic would easily move him. Her Grace is to be conveyed to the county magistrate without delay, he said. Then convey me by way of the northern boundary station, Elara replied. If I am wrong about the eastern bank, you will lose only an hour. If I am correct, and you arrest me here, the village will lose considerably more. Finch looked toward the displaced families gathered inside the ruined lime kiln. Adrian stepped forward and admitted that the complaint supporting the warrant bore his signature, but the authority granted to Rook had produced circumstances he had not understood when he signed it. I will answer personally for the Duchess until the danger has passed. No, Elara said. Adrian turned toward her. You do not answer for me again. Constable Finch may retain the warrant and accompany us. I will remain in his sight, and afterward, I will appear before the magistrate under my own name. Finch considered the proposal, then folded the warrant into his coat. I shall escort Her Grace to the station for the purpose of preventing loss of life. Any man who objects may explain his objection after the flood. Elara selected only Thomas's canvas satchel, 2 lanterns, rope, and her father's compass. She refused Adrian's armed servants because their uniforms would warn Rook before she reached the tunnel. Adrian could assist only under 3 conditions. He would immediately sign a revocation of Rook's authority, place Thomas and the Bell family under written ducal protection, and surrender every recovered paper to neutral custody rather than carry it back to Whitcombe Hall. Agreed, he said. You will sign before we leave. Mrs. Sayer produced paper and ink from the emergency supply chest. Adrian signed all 3 orders upon the flat stone of the kiln wall, and Finch witnessed them. Elara accepted his cooperation, but offered no gratitude. They entered the old quarry shaft with Josiah Bell guiding them. The passage descended through wet limestone before narrowing into a brick maintenance tunnel beneath the boundary station. Water ran ankle-deep along the floor. Every few yards Elara stopped to test its direction with a shaving of candle wax. The current strengthened toward the eastern bank, confirming that Rook had removed at least one control plate. Halfway through the tunnel, they found a new timber brace stamped with the letters KCW and marked in white paint with the number 17. The same batch number had appeared on the missing brass link. Finch copied the marks into his official notebook, while Adrian stared at the timber. "How long has Keswick equipment been installed beneath my land?" he asked. "Long enough for your estate manager to alter the channels before he arranged for you to accuse the one person who would recognize it," Elara answered. Near the station, they heard a metal wheel turning overhead and Thomas shouting. Elara extinguished both lanterns. Through a ventilation grate, she saw Thomas tied beside the gate mechanism, while 2 hired men struggled to lift the last iron control plate. Rook was not among them. Adrian wanted to enter through the front, but Elara stopped him. If the workers released the plate, the water would strike the weakened bank before they could replace it. She directed Josiah to the auxiliary crank concealed inside the tunnel wall, a mechanism shown only in her father's missing field book. It had been designed to lock the upper wheel during maintenance. Adrian braced the crank while Elara aligned its worn teeth by touch. Together they turned it until the gear engaged. Above them, the wheel stopped violently, throwing one worker to the floor. Finch and Josiah entered through the stairwell, while Adrian forced the service hatch open from below. The second worker fled, but Finch captured the first before he reached the outer door. Elara cut Thomas free and examined the gate. One plate remained in place, but it had been inverted so that water pressure forced it outward. She needed the missing iron plates returned to their channels before the basin reached the red flood mark. Thomas pointed toward a covered wagon outside. Rook's men had loaded the plates there for removal after the blast. Adrian and Josiah dragged them inside, while Elara cleared grit from the guide grooves. The first plate descended correctly. The second jammed halfway because its lower corner had been deliberately bent. Thomas offered to climb beneath it, but Elara refused. She used the measuring chain as a sling, placed the auxiliary crank beneath the bent edge, and directed Adrian to turn, only when she signaled. The metal shifted 1 inch, then 2. Water burst through the narrowing gap with enough force to knock Elara against the wall. Adrian caught her arm, but she pulled free as soon as she regained her footing. "Hold the crank," she ordered. The plate settled into place, moments before the water reached the flood mark. The vibration beneath the floor diminished. Outside, the eastern bank held. In a locked iron cabinet beside the gate mechanism, Thomas found Elara's missing northern field book. He did not touch it. Finch examined the lock, recorded its condition, and opened the cabinet using a key taken from the captured worker. Inside lay the original survey, a packet of Keswick delivery receipts, and a wax impression of Elara's private cabinet key. One receipt identified batch 17 and listed Rook as the recipient. Another charged 6 barrels of blasting powder to Lord Keswick's canal account. The captured worker, Silas Mott, admitted only that Rook had hired him, but he confirmed that the estate manager had carried the field book into the station that morning. Finch wrapped the documents in oilcloth, sealed the bundle with his constable's stamp, and required Elara, Thomas, Adrian, Josiah, and Mott to sign the custody record. For the first time, the evidence no longer depended solely upon Elara's word. When Adrian read the field book, he found 3 years of maintenance entries in Elara's hand. Thomas explained that she had paid for the spring inspection and repairs from her separate allowance, after Rook repeatedly denied funds. The functioning auxiliary crank, The gate that had just saved the eastern bank, and the emergency spillway at the reservoir had all been preserved through work Adrian had never known she financed. "Why did you not tell me?" he asked. "I submitted every request through your estate office." Rook said those requests concerned improvements you wished to patent, and you preferred his answer because it required nothing from you. Adrian looked at the water stains spreading across her cloak. "Yes," he said. The admission was quiet and without excuse, but Elara did not mistake recognition for repair. At St. Anne's Parish School, beyond Octavia's household authority, Elara established a temporary office for the displaced tenants. The vicar provided 2 classrooms. Mrs. Sayer organized food and bedding. Thomas reconstructed the altered channel map from memory, while Josiah listed every night he had seen Keswick wagons near the reservoir. Adrian offered money and servants. Elara accepted supplies only after he placed them under the vicar's direction. "You may assist," she told him, "but you will not command this room, question witnesses alone, or remove a single paper." He agreed to every condition. Finch prepared to carry the sealed documents to the county magistrate, accompanied by one canal commissioner who had witnessed the ruined timber yard and now wished to distance himself from Keswick. Before their carriage departed, Finch placed the evidence bundle inside a locked dispatch box, sealed the lid a second time, and recorded the hour in front of 6 witnesses. Elara watched it leave for York shortly after noon. She believed the proof had finally passed beyond Whitcombe's reach. At the hall, however, Octavia received word of the recovery from the worker who had escaped the boundary station. She stood alone in Elara's former morning room, listening as he described the field book, the Keswick receipts, the captured laborer, and the sealed dispatch box, traveling under constable escort. When he finished, she opened her writing desk and removed a copied order bearing Adrian's seal, the same seal Rook had been permitted to use under the authority Adrian signed. "The York Road crosses Fenwick Bridge," she said. "Send word to my uncle. The evidence must not reach the magistrate." Then a concealed door behind the bookcase opened, and Elias Rook stepped into the room, wet from the reservoir but very much present. Octavia handed him the Duke's forged order. "This time," she said, "bring me the box." Rook reached Fenwick Bridge before the evidence carriage, because the copied order in his pocket bore Adrian's seal and granted him the appearance of lawful authority. He brought 4 hired men, dressed as county road officers, and positioned a broken wagon across the narrow stone span. When Constable Finch's carriage arrived, Rook presented the order and claimed the sealed dispatch box contained estate property obtained during Elara's unlawful flight from custody. Finch recognized Adrian's seal, but not the language of the document. He refused to surrender the box and ordered the obstruction removed. Rook's men responded by frightening the carriage horses with a concealed pistol shot. The team reared, the front wheel struck the parapet, and the carriage overturned. Finch and Commissioner Harbury were thrown onto the road. Before either could stand, Rook dragged the dispatch box from beneath the seat and hurled it into a cart loaded with lamp oil. He set the cart rolling toward the river. It struck the broken parapet, overturned, and burned upon the bank below. By the time villagers reached the bridge, the original field book, Keswick receipts, wax key impression, and custody record, sealed inside the box, had been reduced to blackened pulp. Silas Mott, the captured worker traveling under guard in the second carriage, escaped during the confusion. Finch retained his official notebook, and Harbury could testify to what he had seen at the boundary station, but neither man had read every page before the bundle was sealed. The strongest material proof was gone. Octavia moved before news of the attack reached St. Anne's. Using Adrian's copied seal, she summoned a special meeting of the county magistrates and canal commissioners at Whitcombe Hall. She announced that Elara had stolen estate records, recruited frightened tenants into a conspiracy, staged the reservoir explosions, and invented accusations against Lord Keswick to conceal years of unauthorized expenditure. Rook was described as missing and presumed murdered or abducted by Elara's accomplices. By the time Finch returned with his torn coat and blood dried above one eyebrow, Octavia's version had already been copied into 3 sworn statements. Elara entered the great hall under the constable's escort. The same county families who had watched Adrian take her keys now filled the benches. Her father's surveying patents had been frozen by a magistrate pending the fraud inquiry. Her separate allowance had been suspended by the solicitor overseeing the trust, and the tenants sheltering at the parish school were warned that anyone continuing to assist her might lose access to estate relief. Octavia stood beside the council table, wearing the same copper-red gown she had worn when she received Elara's keys. The dispatch box was destroyed before its contents could be examined, she told the magistrates. Conveniently, the only people claiming to have seen these miraculous papers are the Duchess, her servant, her apprentice, a tenant dependent upon her favor, and a constable who violated his own warrant. Finch's face reddened, but Elara signaled him to remain silent until formally questioned. Commissioner Harbury described the altered control gate and the sealed documents recovered from its cabinet. Lord Keswick dismissed him as a frightened junior official seeking to escape responsibility for a failed inspection. Thomas testified that Rook had carried the original field book into the station. Octavia produced a statement alleging that Thomas had stolen that book weeks earlier. Josiah Bell began to describe the Keswick wagons he had seen at the reservoir, but the magistrate read aloud a notice showing that his daughter's lease had been terminated that morning for unpaid rent. Bell's courage faltered. Elara did not blame him. Octavia had made truth cost more than a poor family could afford. Then Adrian rose from the head of the hall. Octavia turned toward him with the serene expectation that he would reinforce her account. Instead, he removed the ducal seal from his coat and placed it on the council table. "The order Constable Finch saw at Fenwick Bridge was not issued by me," he said, "but its existence was made possible by my conduct. I authorized Elias Rook to use my seal for Northern Works. I signed an accusation against my wife after refusing her request for an independent inquiry. I saw witnesses look to Rook before speaking, and I chose political advantage over examination. The reservoir was sabotaged under authority I granted. Lord Keswick warned him that such a statement would end the canal agreement and expose Whitcombe to claims from every injured tenant." "Then let the agreement end," Adrian replied, "and let every valid claim be brought." He formally withdrew Whitcombe's canal petition, surrendered his position on the County Improvement Board, and pledged the unentailed southern woodland as security for rebuilding the tenants' homes. The confession cost him influence, credit, and a substantial part of the property he could freely dispose of, but it did not restore Elara's name. Octavia calmly argued that Adrian's remorse proved only that he had been emotionally manipulated by his wife after the disaster. The presiding magistrate found the accusations against Rook troubling, but concluded that without the recovered documents, the case against Keswick Canal Works remained unproven. Elara was ordered to remain at the parish school under recognizance until a formal assize hearing. Thomas was prohibited from leaving the county, and the trust controlling Elara's patents would remain frozen. To the watching room, Octavia had won. She retained the household keys, the estate records, and enough official doubt to keep Elara powerless. After the hearing, Adrian approached Elara beneath the same chandeliers where he had first denounced her. "I will correct every statement I made," he said. "You cannot correct a choice by reversing it after its consequences become visible. I know. Do you?" She looked toward the tenant families leaving the hall without homes to return to. "You lost a canal agreement. They lost roofs, wages, and trust in the name that governed them. Do not ask me to measure those losses as equal." He did not ask for forgiveness. He simply stepped aside and allowed her to leave. At the parish school, Elara examined everything the conspirators had failed to destroy. Finch's notebook preserved the marks copied from the Batch 17 timber. Mrs. Sayer remembered the beeswax beneath the cabinet hinge. Thomas could reproduce the original boundary measurements from training exercises he had completed with Elara's father. Josiah knew when the wagons had arrived, though his family needed protection before he could testify freely. None of it alone proved the entire scheme. Elara opened her compass and studied the shorter leg that produced the crescent puncture found beside her forged initials. Her father had never regarded the puncture as a defect. He used it as an orientation mark when transferring measurements from field books to finished maps. The crescent always pointed toward true north. On the forged map, displayed at the first accusation, however, the crescent pointed east. Whoever copied the mark understood its appearance, but not its purpose. Elara suddenly saw the weakness in Octavia's plan. Octavia and Rook had stolen maps, instruments, seals, and signatures, yet neither possessed a surveyor's knowledge. They depended upon copied information and acted whenever they believed Elara had discovered something they had missed. They destroyed the evidence because they knew what was inside the box, Thomas said. Then we shall give them something else to destroy, Elara replied. She drew a new map of the northern boundary and deliberately placed a non-existent brass marker beneath the ruined East Bridge. Beside it, she wrote a false notation suggesting that the marker concealed the original legal coordinates of every protected tenant farm. Only 3 copies would exist. One would remain openly in her temporary office, one would be placed with Finch, and one would be shown to Adrian in a room Octavia's servants could observe. If Rook attempted to remove a marker that had never existed, or Octavia publicly claimed it had already been found, they would reveal access to information available only through the baited map. Elara set down her pencil. They believe they have destroyed the truth, she said. Now we shall force them to lie about something that does not exist. Before allowing the baited map to leave her hands, Elara asked Constable Finch, Commissioner Harbury, Thomas, and the vicar to witness its creation. Finch copied the false coordinates into his official notebook and recorded that no brass marker had ever existed beneath the ruined East Bridge. Thomas added 3 tiny surveyor's ticks along the lower margin, marks invisible to anyone who did not know to look for them. Elara then left 1 copy openly upon the desk in the parish school and arranged for Adrian to examine another in Whitcombe Hall's library while 2 of Octavia's servants were present. By morning, the schoolroom copy had disappeared. Elara made no attempt to recover it. Instead, she petitioned the magistrates for a public evidentiary hearing at Whitcombe Hall and requested the attendance of every tenant whose land appeared on the disputed survey. Adrian guaranteed the Bell family's lease from his own unentailed property, removing Rook's threat before Josiah testified. Thomas remained at the vicarage under Finch's protection until the hearing began. Mrs. Sayer placed the remaining household accounts in Harbury's custody. Nathan and the Marsh family were escorted separately, so no one could pressure them into agreeing upon a story. Elara also sent a sealed request to the Birmingham foundry, whose mark appeared in Finch's notes. The foundry returned a certified duplicate of its Batch 17 order book, with a senior clerk authorized to identify the purchaser. When the hearing opened, nearly every bench beneath the Whitcombe chandeliers was occupied. Octavia attacked first. She declared that workers repairing the ruined East Bridge had discovered an old brass boundary marker concealed beneath its foundation. Rook entered the hall carrying the marker upon a black cloth. His supposed disappearance was explained as a necessary flight from Elara's violent accomplices. The object bore Elara's father's initials, a series of legal coordinates, and a crescent-shaped survey mark. According to Octavia, it proved Elara had known the true boundary lay farther west than the official estate maps showed. She accused Elara of concealing the marker, inventing Keswick's sabotage, and causing the flood so she could blame others when her fraudulent land transactions were exposed. Rook described finding the marker beneath the eastern foundation at 7 that morning. 2 Keswick laborers swore they had watched him lift it from undisturbed soil. Lord Keswick demanded Elara's immediate imprisonment and permanent surrender of her surveying patents. Elara waited until every accusation had been entered into the magistrate's record. Then she asked Rook to repeat the location. "Beneath the eastern foundation stone of the ruined bridge," he said. "At what depth?" 3 feet. "Was the marker standing upright?" "Yes." "And the coordinates engraved upon it?" Rook read them aloud. They matched the baited map exactly. Elara turned toward Finch. He opened his notebook and read the statement recorded the previous evening. The coordinates were invented, the location deliberately false, and all witnesses present knew that no marker existed there. Thomas identified the 3 surveyors' ticks on the stolen map, now lying among Rook's papers. Finch then produced the untouched 3rd copy, still sealed with the vicar's stamp. The hall fell silent. "You did not discover that marker beneath the bridge," Elara said. "You manufactured it after stealing a map from St. Anne's School." Rook claimed Elara had fabricated the bait only after learning of his discovery. Finch answered by showing the magistrates the dated entries in his bound official notebook, written before Rook's alleged excavation. Commissioner Harbury and the vicar confirmed the time. Elara asked that the counterfeit marker be placed beside her father's compass. Thomas demonstrated how the shorter leg created the crescent puncture used to orient transferred measurements. On genuine surveys, the crescent always pointed north. On Rook's marker, as on the forged map shown at Elara's first accusation, the crescent pointed east. "Someone copied the appearance of my father's mark without understanding its purpose," Elara explained. "The same person had access to his compass after a wax impression was taken from my cabinet key." Mrs. Sayer testified that no member of her staff had cleaned the workroom on the day Elara found beeswax beneath the hinge. Adrian confirmed that only Rook possessed an estate master key before the household keys were given to Octavia. Octavia objected that this implicated Rook alone. Elara turned to the date on the forged survey. The household provision book proved the river had been frozen beneath 9 inches of ice on October 12th. The 3 laborers who had signed statements against her were called separately, now protected by Adrian's written guarantee that their leases would not be terminated for truthful testimony. The first admitted Rook had dictated his statement. The second said Octavia had been present behind a folding screen during the dictation. The third identified Lord Keswick's secretary as the man who threatened his widowed mother's cottage. Josiah Bell then testified to the covered Keswick wagons arriving at the reservoir 3 nights before the explosions. Nathan described following the wagons carrying blasting powder toward the western spillway. Harbury read Finch's notes, documenting Batch 17 timber installed inside the maintenance tunnel. The Birmingham foundry clerk placed a duplicate order book upon the council table. It showed that Batch 17 included timber braces, brass fittings, replacement sluice hinges, and 6 barrels of quarry powder, all delivered under a single account. Octavia attempted to leave, but Finch closed the doors. She insisted the purchases were legitimate canal preparations authorized by Adrian. Elara answered by laying Adrian's original authorization beside the forged order used at Fenwick Bridge. Adrian authenticated his signature and admitted granting Rook limited use of the ducal seal. He also identified the limits he had written. No inhabited land, active drainage structure, or boundary marker could be altered without direct approval. The Fenwick order removed those limits and carried an impression made after the seal developed a shallow crack during the reservoir emergency. Adrian had retained the seal upon his person from that moment until surrendering it publicly. Therefore, the later impression could only have come from the unauthorized copy Octavia possessed. He did not interpret the surveys or expose the false marker. He merely named the precise authority he had recklessly granted and the point at which it had been exceeded. Elara reconstructed the scheme from acts already established. Rook diverted water through protected farms so they would appear unproductive. Keswick intended to purchase or condemn the damaged acreage cheaply for the canal route. The forged survey made Elara responsible for the alterations, while the theft accusation removed her access before she could inspect the northern boundary. Adrian's decision to empower Rook allowed the spillway to be demolished lawfully in appearance, destroying Whitcombe's timber income and erasing physical boundary evidence beneath the flood. When the original documents were recovered, Octavia and Rook used Adrian's copied seal to intercept and burn them. The counterfeit marker was intended to replace what the fire had destroyed, but it repeated false coordinates known only from Elara's baited map. Lord Keswick called the reconstruction speculation. "Then let us leave speculation behind," Elara said. She asked the foundry clerk to open the order book to batch 17. Each commissioned item required not only an account name, but the handwritten authorization of the person who approved its design and delivery. The clerk adjusted his spectacles and examined the signature beside the counterfeit brass boundary marker. Octavia's composure finally broke. She looked toward her uncle. Lord Keswick looked toward the doors. Rook took one step backward, but Finch's hand closed around his arm. Elara placed the counterfeit marker before the clerk. "You have the original order, the maker's batch record, and the object produced from it," she said. "Tell the magistrates who commissioned this marker and who instructed your foundry to engrave my father's private symbol upon it." The foundry clerk turned the order book so the magistrates could see the signature for themselves. "The brass marker was commissioned by Lady Octavia Crowell," he said. "The drawings were delivered by Mr. Elias Rook, and payment was guaranteed through Lord Keswick's canal account." Octavia denied it immediately, but the clerk produced 2 letters she had written to the foundry, both carrying the same angular capital O and the same distinctive correction where she had changed the word ornament to instrument. One letter instructed the craftsman to copy the crescent symbol from a wax impression supplied by Rook. The second demanded that the finished marker be delivered without appearing in the ordinary shipping register. The room moved from disbelief into silence. Lord Keswick claimed his niece had acted without his knowledge, but the batch 17 account bore his countersignature beneath every payment, including the 6 barrels of blasting powder. Rook attempted to blame Octavia and offered to testify in exchange for mercy. Elara stopped him before he could transform evidence into a convenient confession. She asked the magistrates to rely upon the order book, Finch's notes, Harbury's inspection, the labourer's testimony, the altered gates, and Adrian's copied seal, not upon anything Rook now said to save himself. Piece by piece, the complete scheme emerged. Lord Keswick's preferred canal route crossed 12 protected tenant farms, whose leases and drainage guarantees made lawful acquisition slow and expensive. Rook diverted the northern streams so those farms would appear waterlogged and unproductive. Octavia used a wax copy of Elara's cabinet key to remove her father's compass and field books. They created false maps, payment orders, and measurements bearing Elara's initials, expecting Adrian's pride to make him more willing to suspect his surveyor's daughter-wife than admit she understood his estate better than the men he employed. The public accusation removed Elara from the council. Adrian signed appointment, then gave Rook control of the gates, the records, and the northern works. The reservoir was filled deliberately. The spillway was blasted to flood the protected acreage, erase boundary evidence, and destroy Whitcombe's timber income until Adrian became financially dependent upon Keswick's investment. Thomas was taken because he could identify the false measurements. When Elara recovered the original documents, Octavia used the copied ducal seal to intercept and burn the dispatch box at Fenwick Bridge. Finally, after stealing the baited map, they manufactured the marker now lying before the magistrates, an object engraved with coordinates for a location Elara had invented less than 24 hours earlier. Octavia's fatal mistake had been believing that possessing a surveyor's instruments was the same as possessing her knowledge. Finch arrested Rook for forgery, conspiracy, destruction of evidence, and the attack upon the evidence carriage. Octavia and Lord Keswick were placed under guarded confinement pending the assizes. The Canal Commission suspended Keswick, froze his project accounts, and ordered an independent examination of every parcel acquired along the proposed route. In the months that followed, Rook's hidden commissions and Keswick's fraudulent land options were uncovered through foundry duplicates, carrier receipts, and bank drafts. Rook was convicted and sentenced to a long term of transportation. Keswick lost his commission, was compelled to sell property to satisfy restitution claims, and withdrew permanently from public office before facing further proceedings. Octavia's own correspondence proved that she had directed the forged marker and the destruction of Elara's evidence. She was convicted of conspiracy and fraud, lost the income her uncle had controlled for her, and left Yorkshire under legal restriction after serving her sentence. The magistrates struck every accusation against Elara from the record. Her surveying patents and separate allowance were released immediately. Adrian then stood before the same county families who had watched him take his wife's keys. He did not speak of manipulation as though it excused him. "Lady Octavia deceived me, but she did not make my choice," he said. "I refused an independent inquiry because the truth threatened an advantage I wanted. I saw frightened witnesses look toward my estate manager before speaking, and I signed the accusation regardless. I removed my wife's authority, gave it to those she warned me against, and allowed her work to be used as evidence of guilt. Every loss that followed was enabled by my decision." He formally withdrew his complaint, corrected the county record, and acknowledged that Elara, not Octavia's counsel, had saved the reservoir, the village, and the surviving northern farms. He sold the unentailed southern woodland and used the proceeds to rebuild the cottages, replace the timber workers' lost wages, restore the Bell lease, and establish an independently administered flood repair fund. Because the ducal title and entailed estate could not simply be transferred, he executed a separate deed placing Elara's patents, professional income, instruments, and a freehold house in trust for her sole use, beyond his control. He also agreed to a legal separation with generous maintenance without requiring her return or surrender of any claim. Only after the deeds had been signed, witnessed, and placed with independent trustees did he approach her privately. On the council table lay the silver household keys and her wedding ring. "The keys are yours," he said. "No," Elara replied. "They belong to the next woman appointed lawfully to manage this household. I no longer measure my worth by what I am permitted to govern for you." Adrian accepted the refusal. "And the ring, it represents a decision I am not prepared to make. I will not ask you to make it today. You will not ask at all. If that decision ever comes, it will come from me." He bowed his head. "Then I will wait without expectation." Elara took only the narrow iron key to her father's cedar cabinet. She left Whitcombe Hall beneath the chandeliers without scandalized whispers following her. The people in the room stood as she passed. 6 months later, she opened Whitcombe Survey and Waterworks at the freehold house, secured through her independent trust. Thomas became her first salaried assistant. Mrs. Sayer chose to serve as housekeeper, and Elara received commissions from 3 counties, seeking protection against winter floods. Adrian sent written accounts of every restitution payment, but never asked her to return. He visited the tenants, worked beside laborers rebuilding the spillway, and allowed his failures to be named without defending himself. Nearly a year after the hearing, he came to Elara's office carrying no flowers, legal papers, or promises. He waited outside until she noticed him through the window. "The eastern retaining wall is complete," he said when she opened the door. "I brought the final measurements. You may inspect them, or I can leave them with Thomas." Elara studied the figures, then looked at the man who had once rejected evidence because accepting it cost too much. "You used the correct northern gradient," she said. "I learned from the person I should have listened to first. She did not return his ring. She did not offer forgiveness as a reward for 1 year of decent conduct. Instead, she stepped aside and opened the door wider. You may come in. We will discuss the eastern wall." Adrian entered only after she invited him. Elara turned the new brass key in the lock behind them, not the key to Whitcombe Hall, not a symbol of authority borrowed from her husband, but the key to work, property, and a future that belonged entirely to her.